Game development explained. No theory, just what works.
Imagine taking, I don't know, a massive pile of $100 bills, just bringing them into your office and setting them completely on fire.
Just right there on the floor.
Right there on the floor. And then calling a mandatory all-hands meeting just to discuss the smell of the smoke.
That is, honestly, it's a perfect visual for what we're talking about today.
Because that is essentially what your team is doing. Like every single time you hand off a piece of work with some vague Slack message or, a deeply unhelpful task description.
Oh, absolutely.
You are burning capital, you are burning time, and then you are scheduling a meeting to figure out why everyone is, behind schedule.
It is a phenomenal waste of resources. And, the crazy part is it happens completely by default in almost every modern workplace.
Yeah, it really does.
So today we are doing a deep dive into this really fascinating document we got our hands on. It's titled 260219 handoff.jocks. And it comes with some pretty extensive notes from the author.
And the mission here, our goal for this deep dive, is to really unpack this exact phenomenon.
Right. We want to deconstruct this specific massive bottleneck in knowledge work, which is, the cross-discipline handoff.
How work actually moves from one human brain to another.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Because usually when we talk about fixing a broken system at work, we kind of think about it like an engineering problem, right?
Right, like a machine that needs fixing.
Yeah, like if a piece of software crashes, it generates what developers call a stack trace, which is basically this neat little breadcrumb trail that points directly to the exact line of code that failed. So a developer can look at it and just say, okay, the machine broke right here.
It's totally localized.
Right. It's clean, it's binary, it's either broken or it's not broken.
But the problem, and this is what the source really digs into right away, is that human collaboration does not generate a stack trace.
No, it definitely does not.
When work leaves, say, the design department, and lands on an engineer's desk, or it leaves marketing and lands with the web team, there is no automated breadcrumb trail tracking that context. And the source material makes this really striking distinction right at the beginning. It says that handoff rework hurts a project significantly more than a software bug.
That line hit me so hard. Handoff rework hurts more than a bug.
It's profound, really.
Because a bug is just like a mistake in the logic of a machine.
Yeah.
You fix it, the machine runs. But when a handoff fails, the damage isn't just contained to one person's screen.
What's fascinating here is the viral nature of a broken handoff.
Viral. Yeah.
It's a systemic infection of misunderstanding. I mean, a bug sits quietly until you trigger it, right? But a bad handoff actively spreads.
It jumps across discipline boundaries.
Exactly. It infects your communication channels, generating these endless, completely confused Slack threads.
Oh, the Slack threads.
Right. And it spawns those review loops where work just kind of bounces back and forth like a ping pong ball.
Yeah.
And critically, because this rework usually arrives late in the production process, it creates massive schedule pressure.
You have to stop everything.
Exactly. It forces everyone to literally slam on the brakes to reconstruct the shared context that honestly should have been there from the start.
I want you, the person listening to this right now, to kind of picture your own day-to-day work environment. Have you ever felt like your project schedule transformed into this bizarre tax system where everyone is just forced to pay interest?
Oh, that's such a good way to put it.
You know exactly the feeling. Like you finish a task, you think, great, my part is done, and you toss it over the proverbial fence to the next department. And then 3 days later, it comes bouncing back with 20 fundamental questions.
Yep.
Now your current week is completely derailed because you have to go back and explain the work you thought you finished last week. You are basically paying interest on a poorly executed transfer.
The concept of paying interest on poor communication is the perfect lens for this. We see teams lose days, sometimes entire weeks, to a single broken transfer of work.
Whole weeks.
And the tragedy of this workflow is that it rarely stems from, laziness or incompetence.
Right. People aren't trying to do a bad job.
People genuinely want to do good work. The breakdown occurs because the work crossed a discipline boundary and it just arrived naked.
Naked? Why?
Yeah, it didn't have the protective packaging required to survive contact with someone else's assumptions.
Right, it crossed a boundary. And to actually fix this broken tax system, the author argues we have to go all the way down to the bedrock and completely redefine what the word handoff actually means.
Yes.
Because the way most of us operate, the mental model we use for passing work around, it is fundamentally flawed.
If we look at how most teams operate, They treat a handoff as a distinct moment in time, an event.
Like checking a box.
Exactly. They think, I assigned the Jira ticket to Sarah, therefore the handoff has occurred. Or, I dropped the link to the Figma design file in the team chat. Boom, handoff complete.
We treat it like handing a physical baton in a relay race.
We really do.
Which makes sense if you are working on an assembly line, right? Like if I'm handing you a physical car door and your job is to attach it to the car, handing you the door is the handoff.
Because the object is self-evident.
Exactly. You can see the door. You know what a car is. But in knowledge work, I'm not handing you a car door.
No.
I'm handing you a concept, a set of constraints and an expected outcome. Treating that like a single moment in time is a recipe for disaster.
The source insists we abandon the event mindset entirely. In production reality, a handoff is a transfer of responsibility across a boundary.
Okay, a transfer of responsibility.
Right. The person initiating the work is fully responsible for packaging the context. But, and this is the critical shift here, the receiver is responsible for confirming they actually understand that context before they accept ownership of the task.
Wait, let me make sure I'm capturing this because this feels like a massive paradigm shift.
It really is.
You are saying the work is not actually handed off, like it doesn't belong to the receiver, until the receiver explicitly confirms they possess the context required to do the job.
Correct.
So if I assign you a ticket and you don't understand it, it is still my ticket.
Yes. The responsibility remains with the initiator until the payload of context is successfully decoded by the receiver.
That is wild.
And the author provides a very specific, unforgiving benchmark for when that transfer is actually successful. They call it the meeting metric.
The meeting metric. Okay.
The work is only handed off when the person receiving it is equipped to make progress without scheduling a meeting.
Okay. So if the receiver looks at the task, scratches their head, and immediately types, hey, can we jump on a quick call so you can walk me through this?
Then the handoff failed.
The handoff failed. You successfully moved the physical location of the task, but you completely failed to move the context.
You essentially just moved the confusion further downstream, and now it's going to cost two people's time instead of one.
That is painfully accurate.
A successful handoff allows the receiver to continue the work independently, ask significantly fewer questions, and crucially, make fewer incorrect assumptions when they hit inevitable roadblocks.
Now, I have to step in here and play devil's advocate for you listening because I can hear the objections forming right now.
Sure, let's hear them.
Synchronous collaboration, right? Getting in a room, brainstorming, hashing things out on a call, that's usually seen as a positive thing.
Absolutely.
I mean, I love a good creative jam session. Are we arguing that we should become these isolated drones who only communicate through rigorously formatted tickets and never actually speak to each other?
Right, like we're killing the magic.
Exactly. Isn't the quick call where the magic happens?
It is a completely valid concern, and the source is very careful to clarify this. We are not trying to ban synchronous communication or kill the creative process.
Okay, good.
If you and a colleague are trying to figure out, like, the emotional arc of a character's storyline, or you are whiteboarding a complex new software architecture, absolutely get on a call.
Get in a room.
Get in a room. Use a whiteboard. Complex generative problem solving requires synchronous human interaction. However, and this is the big however, synchronous communication is an absolutely terrible medium for transmitting basic facts.
Basic facts, the foundational realities of the work.
Exactly. The goal of a proper handoff is to prevent predictable, expensive, operational questions from arriving late in the process.
Right.
You should not need a 30-minute video call to discover which specific branch of the code base the prototype lives in.
No.
You should not need a meeting to figure out if the marketing copy needs to be translated into German. Those are basic facts.
Yeah, that's just information transfer.
Right. If your team is relying on quick calls to transmit basic facts, you are bleeding time and focus. You're using a highly expensive, high-friction tool, which is a meeting, to do a job that a well-structured sentence could do instantly.
That makes perfect sense. So keep the calls for the magic, the brainstorming, the deep problem solving, but use the asynchronous handoff for the mechanics. But that brings us to the big question. If we know what a handoff should look like, why do they spontaneously combust so often?
Well, the author provides a really good diagnostic framework here, identifying 5 specific reasons handoffs fail.
The 5 fatal flaws.
The 5 fatal flaws.
And honestly, reading through these was a deeply uncomfortable experience for me because I recognized my own behavior in every single one of them.
Oh, I think everyone does. When handoffs break down, Human nature leads us to blame the people or the disciplines, right?
Oh, for sure. It's their fault.
We hear things like, the engineering department just doesn't understand the creative vision, or the design team is completely disconnected from technical reality.
Right, we blame communication styles.
But the source argues the root causes are much more structural, much simpler, and entirely repeatable. The first fatal flaw is that the context exists, but it is entirely scattered.
Scattered context is the bane of my existence. This happens constantly, like the overarching why of the project. The ultimate goal is living in some strategy document created 3 months ago.
Which nobody has looked at since.
Exactly. And the specific technical requirements are living in a Jira ticket. And the latest, most urgent pivot on the project direction was casually mentioned in a Slack thread at, like, 4:45 p.m. on a Friday.
The inevitable result is massive cognitive overload for the receiver. The human brain cannot hold all those disparate sources of truth simultaneously, especially when they contradict each other.
So what do?
Well, what happens is the person receiving the work simply starts executing based on whatever piece of context they happen to look at last.
Or whatever is easiest to find.
Exactly. They aren't working from a unified truth. They are working from fragments.
It reminds me of a scenario where you are forced to assemble a massive, complicated piece of IKEA furniture, but the context is scattered all over your house.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right. Like the picture of what the final bookshelf is supposed to look like is taped to your refrigerator.
Okay.
The actual wooden planks are piled up in your living room. The little plastic bag of screws and dowels is sitting on your bathroom sink.
Why is it in the bathroom?
Who knows? And the step-by-step instruction manual is just a series of out-of-order text messages sent by a friend who built it last year.
That analogy maps perfectly to the daily experience of a developer or a designer trying to parse a bad ticket.
They have the pieces, technically.
They do. But because the pieces are decoupled from the instructions and the final vision, the assembly process becomes an exercise in pure guesswork.
You might spend 3 hours carefully building what you think is a coffee table, only to finally check the picture on the fridge and realize you were supposed to be building a wardrobe.
Yes.
You had the context, but because it wasn't packaged together at the moment you assumed responsibility for the work, you made catastrophic assumptions.
Which flows seamlessly into the second fatal flaw of handoffs. Work is almost always described as an activity rather than an intent.
This one requires a bit of an intellectual pivot, I think, because describing work as an activity feels incredibly natural.
It's how we speak in daily life.
Yeah. Wash the dishes, take out the trash. We speak in commands, so when we get to work, we write tickets that say, implement the new drop-down menu, or add a tooltip to the save button.
And implement X sounds wonderfully crisp and actionable. It feels like good management.
It really does.
But the source points out a massive trap here. Describing the activity completely obscures the purpose of the work. It hides the intent.
Okay, how so?
Well, in a complex work environment, if the person doing the work does not understand the intent behind adding that drop-down menu, they are functionally paralyzed the moment they encounter friction.
Let's play this out. I tell an engineer, add a drop-down menu to the settings page. That is the activity.
Right.
The engineer goes into the code base, and they realize the architecture of the settings page is old, it's brittle, and adding a drop-down menu is going to require rewriting 3 weeks worth of code.
A total nightmare.
If they only know the activity, they have 2 choices. Either they blindly waste 3 weeks rewriting the code to fulfill the command, or they stop working, block their schedule, and wait for a meeting to ask me what to do.
Exactly. However, if you had communicated the intent, if the ticket said, allow users to quickly toggle between light mode and dark mode, the dynamic completely changes.
Because now they know the goal.
Yes. Armed with the intent, the engineer hits that same technical roadblock with the drop-down menu, but they don't have to stop working.
It can pivot.
Right. They realize, okay, the drop-down is too expensive to build, but the intent is just to let users toggle the color mode. I can just add a simple toggle switch instead. It takes 2 hours and achieves the exact same goal.
Wow. By hiding the intent behind an activity, you rob your team of their ability to make intelligent, independent trade-offs.
You essentially turn smart, autonomous workers into mindless order takers who break the moment the order becomes complicated.
That is so true. Okay, moving on to the third fatal flaw, and this is the one that causes literal nightmares for producers and project managers. Constraints show up late.
Late constraints. These are the rigid realities of the physical or digital world. Performance budgets, Platform compliance rules, legal requirements, localization edge cases.
Things you cannot negotiate with.
Exactly. When a team operates without a rigorous handoff culture, these constraints are usually treated as an afterthought. They are discovered organically, often way after the heavy lifting of implementation has already occurred.
This creates the most demoralizing cycle in professional work. The build, discover, rework loop.
Oh, it's brutal.
You spend weeks designing this breathtaking, highly animated, incredibly detailed 3D menu system. It looks beautiful.
Yeah.
You hand it over to be implemented, and a week later, someone from the engineering team taps you on the shoulder and says, hey, this is gorgeous, but this specific feature has to run at 60 frames per second on a 5-year-old mobile phone.
And your heart just sinks.
Your design is currently running at 12 frames per second and melting the battery. We have to throw it out.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of team morale, nothing destroys trust faster than elite constraints.
I can imagine.
A constraint that is articulated at the beginning of a project is a creative challenge. A constraint that is discovered at the end of a project is a crisis.
It's a crisis.
It forces teams to rip apart finished work and hack together a compromise solution.
It's devastating. You built a mansion, and then the city zoning board shows up and tells you you only had a permit for a shed. Tear it down.
Perfect analogy.
Which brings us to flaw number 4. Dependencies are incredibly vague.
The modern workplace is deeply interconnected. Very few tasks can be completed in total isolation. But the way teams communicate these dependencies is often astonishingly imprecise.
Yeah, the source specifically calls out phrases like waiting on art or blocked by design that clutter up project management boards.
I see this constantly. You look at a Kanban board, and half the tickets have a big red blocked label. And the only explanation is waiting for marketing copy.
The author is ruthless about this practice. Writing waiting on art is not a dependency plan.
No, it's not.
Blocked by design is not a sequence of operations. When dependencies are communicated that vaguely, the team is not actually scheduling work, they are scheduling hope.
Scheduling hope, that's exactly it.
They are crossing their fingers and hoping the required assets materialize before the deadline hits. A vague dependency offers no actionable information to the receiver about what they should do with their time in the interim.
It's like driving down a highway and suddenly encountering a concrete barrier with a sign that just says road closed.
Yeah.
There's no further information, no estimated time of reopening, no detour route provided. You just have to sit in your car, put it in park, and stare at the concrete barrier. You are completely paralyzed.
And finally, the 5th fatal flaw, which is perhaps the most subtle but insidious of the group. Open questions are left entirely implicit.
This one fascinated me because it digs into the psychology of how teams operate under pressure.
Yes, exactly.
When a project is moving fast, there are always unresolved questions. But teams rarely write them down.
Because unanswered questions do not halt momentum in the way we might think. Professionals want to keep moving. They want to show progress.
Right.
So when an open question is not explicitly documented and assigned an owner, it mutates. An unanswered question quietly turns into an assumption.
It becomes a guess.
The developer assumes the text will always be short. The designer assumes the backend database can handle real-time updates.
And assumptions are the seeds of divergence. The person who initiated the work is holding one assumption in their head, and the person executing the work is building based on a completely different assumption.
And they drift further and further apart day by day.
Exactly. And when they finally sync up a week later, the divergence is massive, and you are right back to the rework tax.
Scattered context, activity instead of intent, late constraints, vague dependencies, implicit questions. These are the 5 fatal flaws.
They are.
And recognizing them is a great first step. But diagnosis is not a cure. The cure proposed by the source is not to purchase a new enterprise software tool or completely restructure your company's org chart.
Thank goodness.
Right. The cure is the implementation of a rigid, lightweight standard.
I love that we aren't just saying, go buy this expensive SaaS product. You don't need a new tool. You need a new payload.
A payload.
The source introduces a concept called the 5 Item Package. It is a minimum payload of context that must accompany any piece of work crossing a boundary.
Think of it as the minimum viable information required to ensure the work survives the journey from one brain to another.
Yes. It acts as the direct antidote to the 5 fatal flaws we just discussed.
The payload analogy works so well here. If you are launching a probe to Mars, you don't just point a rocket at the sky and hit launch.
I hope not.
The probe needs a minimum payload, It needs fuel, it needs a navigation system, it needs communication arrays, and it needs a heat shield. If you leave even one of those out, the mission fails.
It crashes.
If your task handoff has fewer than these 5 specific items, you are actively outsourcing the missing pieces to the receiver, and they're going to fill those gaps with guesses.
And we know how that ends.
So let's dissect this package. We'll start with the first 2 items, which are designed to establish the absolute foundational reality of the work: the destination and the starting line.
The very first item in the handoff package is purpose. This directly combats the flaw of describing work as an activity.
Okay, purpose.
The purpose section must answer a fundamental question for the receiver. Why are we doing this at all? What specific, measurable outcome are we trying to produce for the end user or the business?
And interestingly, the author notes that purpose is the section teams are most likely to skip or gloss over.
Oh, absolutely.
Because to the person initiating the work, the purpose feels painfully obvious. They are suffering from the curse of knowledge.
Right.
Like, if I'm the lead product designer and I've been agonizing over a specific user flow for 3 straight weeks, the reason we need to add a save for later button is so obvious to me that it feels almost insulting to write it down.
But the curse of knowledge dictates that you cannot unknow what you know, making it incredibly difficult to imagine the mental state of someone who lacks your context.
It's a huge blind spot.
To the engineer picking up the ticket on a Tuesday morning, it is not obvious at all. A high-quality purpose statement must be short, and it must be testable.
Testable. Okay.
It cannot be an internal technical milestone. It must describe a player-facing, user-facing, or client-facing outcome. It has to define exactly what the word better means for this specific task.
To make this concrete, let's look at the scenario provided in the source material. It uses a game development context, which is, a fantastic stress test for complex collaboration.
Oh, it really is. Game dev is messy.
But you can immediately see how this applies to any industry. A poorly written purpose would just be add a tooltip.
Which is an activity.
Exactly. We already know that's an activity, not a purpose. But a strong, well-crafted purpose statement looks like this. Reduce early game player confusion by making crafting material requirements highly visible at the exact moment the player fails to craft an item.
Let's unpack the mechanics of why that sentence is so powerful. It gives the developer a clear metric for success.
The goal isn't the tooltip.
Right. The goal is not the existence of a tooltip. The goal is reducing early game confusion.
That is so distinct.
If the developer tries to implement the tooltip, but realizes the screen is too cluttered and the tooltip actually increases confusion, the purpose statement empowers them to stop and pivot.
They can rethink it.
They might say, the tooltip fails the core purpose. Let's try highlighting the missing materials in red instead. The purpose statement serves as a North Star when the initial plan inevitably encounters friction.
It's the ultimate safeguard against building the wrong thing perfectly.
I love that phrasing.
But it is so easy to fall into failure modes here. The author calls out a few common traps. The first we covered, writing the solution instead of the purpose. But the second trap is writing the purpose as a vague corporate slogan.
Oh, the slogans.
Things like improve the UX, or make the interface more intuitive, or delight the customer.
Those phrases are functionally useless in a production environment.
Completely.
How does an engineer write a unit test to determine if they have successfully delighted the customer? They can't.
Right.
The source provides a fantastic litmus test here. If you cannot articulate the purpose of the work in a single, concrete, testable sentence, you are not handing off a task. You are handing off a problem disguised as a task.
A problem disguised as a task. That is such a sharp critique of bad management.
It really is.
You are basically saying, I, the leader, don't actually know what we're trying to achieve here, but I don't want to do the hard work of figuring it out, so I'm going to make it your problem to solve while pretending I'm just delegating an activity.
It is an abdication of leadership. The purpose section forces the initiator to do the hard cognitive work up front.
Okay, so that's purpose. Once the destination is set, we move to item 2 in the package, current state.
Right. If purpose is the destination, current state is the precise GPS coordinates of where we are standing right now.
Where are we?
It answers what exists today, what code is already written, what decisions have already been finalized.
Establishing this baseline is critical because it prevents 2 people from trying to solve the exact same problem using completely different starting assumptions.
Exactly.
A solid current state section explicitly points to the relevant branch of code, the specific Figma file, or the exact prototype that should be used as the foundation. But more importantly, it establishes the boundaries of the work.
Yes.
It explicitly states what is in scope for this specific iteration and what is firmly excluded.
Let's go back to our game development scenario. The team trying to fix the crafting confusion. A rigorous current state statement would read like this. A prototype of the crafting menu currently exists in the feature branch labeled Crafting Wii V2.
Okay, very specific.
It uses temporary placeholder icons. The current user flow simply fails silently with a generic error message. Crucially, this task covers updating the failure state only. It does not include redesigning the overall inventory screen.
That final clause, it does not include redesigning the overall inventory screen, is the linchpin of the entire statement.
It absolutely is.
The author identifies a phenomenon called scope fights, where teams argue over how much work was actually supposed to be done. By providing a strict boundary in the current state, you eliminate the ambiguity that fuels scope fights.
I love the analysis of scope fights here. The insight is that when you hand work to talented, ambitious people, their natural instinct is to improve things.
They want to make it better.
An ambitious developer might look at the failure state, notice the placeholder icons, look at the rest of the inventory screen and decide, well, the whole thing looks a bit dated. While I'm in here fixing the failure message, I'll just be proactive and overhaul the entire inventory UI so it all matches.
And suddenly, a task that was estimated to take 2 days balloons into a 3-week architectural overhaul.
And destroys the sprint.
The developer had the best of intentions. They were trying to be a good teammate. But because the current state did not draw a rigid box around the work and explicitly say, we are only operating inside this box today, they went rogue and blew up the sprint schedule. You have to provide both a starting line and a fence.
The starting line and a fence, exactly.
Okay, so we have the first 2 items of the payload. We have our destination, the purpose. We have our starting line and our fences, the current state. That provides incredible clarity.
It does.
But clarity of direction is not enough to guarantee success because the real world is full of physical limitations and traffic jams.
Reality is messy.
You can know exactly where you want to drive, but if you don't realize your car only has a gallon of gas and the bridge ahead is washed out, you are going to crash. That is where the final 3 items of the package become essential.
To prevent a team from investing weeks into an elegant, brilliant solution that is ultimately completely unshippable, the handoff payload must map out the hard limits of reality and the moving parts of the organization.
Right.
This brings us to item 3, constraints.
Constraints. The absolute non-negotiable rules that the work must obey. The text categorizes these into 3 very distinct buckets to help teams think comprehensively about limitations.
The first bucket is technical constraints. These are the rigid limitations of your hardware or software environment. Performance budgets, memory limits, processing power, platform compliance rules.
Stuff the computer cares about.
Right. If you're building a website, it might be maximum page load times on a 3G connection. The second bucket is content or brand constraints. This covers the tone of voice, age rating restrictions, legal compliance, accessibility standards, or strict lore rules if you are working within an established intellectual property.
Right. If you are making a Star Wars game, a core content constraint is that lightsabers don't run out of batteries.
Exactly.
You can't just build a battery mechanic because you think it's fun.
Precisely. And the third bucket is process constraints. These are the temporal and organizational realities. Hard deadlines, strict review gates, required approvals from external partners, and localization schedules.
The example provided in the text weaves these together beautifully. The new UI must run at 60 frames per second on the Nintendo Switch in handheld mode. The UI text must support full localization, meaning absolutely no baked text in the image files. Do not introduce any new font families. All color choices must comply with the established accessibility contrast guidelines.
That is a formidable list of rules.
But it's so clear.
If we connect this to the broader philosophy of production, this section is where pure design intent violently collides with production reality.
It's the reality check.
The danger here is relying on implicit tribal knowledge. A lead engineer might assume, well, everyone knows we don't use big text on this project because we ship in 12 languages.
But the junior UI artist who started 3 weeks ago does not know that.
No, they don't.
If you omit that constraint from the payload, you are setting a trap for that junior artist.
And when someone steps in that trap, the consequences are severe. I want to highlight a quote from the source here because it frames the stakes perfectly. A constraint that appears after implementation begins is a schedule event.
A schedule event.
It is not a minor adjustment. It is a seismic disruption that forces you to redraw the project timeline. Constraints are not there to stifle creativity. They are there to reduce surprise.
Reduce surprise. I love that.
They ensure that the creative energy is directed toward a solution that can actually ship to the customer, rather than a theoretical masterpiece that melts the servers.
Which flows right into item 4, dependencies. This section answers the critical logistical question. What does this work rely on from outside sources, and in what sequence must things happen?
As we touched on when discussing the fatal flaws, a dependency cannot just be a vague stop sign. It must be a highly explicit sequencing statement.
Okay, so what goes into it?
To be functional, a dependency statement must capture 3 pieces of information. Who or what specifically are you depending on? Is that dependency a hard blocker or a soft, non-blocking dependency? And critically, what actionable steps can the receiver take while they're waiting for the dependency to resolve?
The detour analogy is so vital here. A vague dependency is the road closed sign with no further information. You stop, you wait, you waste time.
Right.
A rigorously defined dependency is a sign that says, bridge out ahead, detour, take Route 4 for 2 miles to keep moving. You don't halt your momentum, you simply shift your operational path.
Let's look at how the source structures a healthy dependency statement. Blocking dependency. We need the final high-resolution ingredient icons from the art team with an ETA of Friday.
Okay, that's clear.
Non-blocking dependency. Engineering can wire the UI state logic using placeholder squares and integrate all the localization text keys right now.
That transformed a bottleneck into a parallel action plan.
It totally does.
The engineer reads that and knows they don't have an excuse to watch YouTube until Friday. They have a clear, sanctioned path to make meaningful progress on the underlying logic while the art is being finalized.
The failure modes to watch out for here are obvious but common. Naming a dependency without securing an ETA from the providing team, failing to categorize whether it actually blots core progress, and offering the receiver no strategy for parallel work.
Which brings us to the 5th and final item in the payload, and arguably the most culturally revealing part of the entire framework: open questions.
This item genuinely shifted how I view team dynamics. The source explicitly mandates that we document the unresolved ambiguities of a task.
But teams instinctively avoid doing this.
Yeah, because writing down, feels like admitting a flaw in the plan. It feels like weakness.
There is a deep-seated fear in many corporate cultures of exposing uncertainty. Leaders want to project total control.
But in complex production, uncertainty is a physical reality. It exists whether you formally acknowledge it or not.
Sweeping it under the rug doesn't resolve the ambiguity. It just makes it invisible and therefore highly dangerous.
Exactly. Item 5 forces the team to answer what is currently unresolved that actually matters to the execution of this task.
But importantly, this isn't just a space for the product manager to brain dump their anxieties.
No, not at all.
The framework dictates that a valid open question must adhere to 3 strict structural properties. First, the question must be highly specific. Second, the question must be assigned a named owner, a specific human being responsible for finding the answer. And third, it must have a decision deadline paired with a default assumption.
The default assumption mechanism is a stroke of organizational genius.
It really is.
Let's analyze the example provided. Open question. Do we display the exact numerical crafting requirements, or do we just use a generic progress bar? Owner, lead design, decision deadline, Wednesday morning stand-up, default assumption if missed, implement exact numbers.
That default assumption changes everything.
It acts as an organizational forcing function. It strips away the paralyzing "we'll see" mentality. It forces the leadership to reveal exactly where they're willing to tolerate ambiguity.
Right.
But more importantly, it creates an automatic fail-safe against endless waiting. If Wednesday morning rolls around, the stand-up meeting happens, and lead design hasn't made a final call on the UI, the project does not stall.
The engineer doesn't have to send 4 follow-up emails. They don't have to schedule an alignment meeting.
They simply execute the default assumption, building the UI with exact numbers, and the work marches forward.
It empowers the individual contributor to keep moving without feeling like they're going rogue. If the default assumption is written in the ticket and the deadline passes, they have explicit permission to proceed. It closes the loop automatically.
If a team genuinely wants to reduce their meeting load, they must make their open questions highly visible and tightly bounded by default assumptions.
Okay, let's zoom out and look at what we've built. We have the complete blueprint of the 5-item package: purpose, current state, constraints, dependencies, and open questions.
It is a brilliant, logically airtight framework.
But theory only matters if it survives contact with reality.
True.
And I can already hear the collective, exhausted groan of project managers, designers, and developers everywhere. Because whenever you introduce a new framework, a new set of rules, or a new template to a busy team, you trigger a severe allergic reaction to the word bureaucracy.
It is a totally justified reaction. The immediate thought is, great, management, read another blog post, and now I have to fill out a 5-page form just to get my work done.
Exactly.
A heavy-handed implementation will cause the team to actively rebel against the system.
Exactly. So how do we actually inject this into a team's daily workflow without slowing the entire operation down to a crawl? How do we make this practical?
The source outlines a battle-tested, lightweight implementation pattern designed specifically to avoid the bureaucracy trap. It relies on establishing 2 simple habits rather than a massive new workflow. Habit 1 is to make the 5 items the default template in whatever software you already use.
So whether your team lives in Jira, Trello, Asana, or Linear, you just go into the settings and make those 5 headings: purpose, current state, constraints, dependencies, open questions, the default text that populates when someone clicks create new task.
Yes, reduce the friction of starting, but the critical instruction the author gives here is to strictly limit the length.
Okay, how long?
The entire package should be 10 to 15 lines of text total. It is a payload, a quick burst of context. It is not a 50-page technical specification document. Bullet points are encouraged.
Keep it punchy.
Very punchy.
Habit 2 is to add a single check moment to your existing process. Don't create a new meeting to review handoffs. Kick a moment that already exists, like backlog grooming, sprint planning, or daily triage, and simply use that moment to scan the ticket.
A lead engineer or a producer can literally glance at the ticket, and if the 5 headings aren't filled out, they reject the handoff. They send it back to the initiator. It becomes a simple gatekeeping exercise.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because I want to push back on this on behalf of the listener who is dealing with the messy reality of day-to-day work.
Okay, pushback.
Let's say I'm a UX designer, I'm reviewing a build, and I notice a typo in a menu screen, or I realize the hex code for a background color needs to be tweaked to be slightly darker. Am I seriously expected to sit down and write out purpose, current state, constraints, dependencies, and open questions for a color tweak that will take the engineer literally 2 minutes to execute? That feels like insane, suffocating overhead.
And if you forced a team to adhere to the package for every micro task, the system would collapse under its own weight within a week. People would despise it.
It would be awful.
The author is deeply pragmatic about this and explicitly addresses your exact scenario with a concept called the coffee test.
The coffee test. I am always a fan of frameworks that incorporate caffeine.
The rule is incredibly simple. If the task will take the receiver less time to complete than it takes to drink a cup of coffee, skip the package.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Do not force the rigorous 5-item process for a typo fix, a minor color tweak, or a simple asset swap. A single sentence and a screenshot in Slack is perfectly appropriate for that level of work.
Okay.
You reserve the 5-item payload for work that carries actual weight work, that crosses boundaries, requires critical thinking, and carries a real risk of expensive misunderstanding.
Okay, that makes the whole system much more palatable. It's about risk mitigation, not blind compliance.
Exactly.
But speaking of compliance, for those bigger, riskier tasks, how do we ensure people aren't just phoning it in? Because anyone who has worked in a corporate environment has seen malicious compliance, where people just type NA into every box on a form just to get the system off their back.
The author anticipates this and introduces the handoff readiness test to combat it.
Okay, how does that work?
Before work is officially passed across the boundary, the initiator should be able to grab a member of the receiving discipline, show them the ticket, and ask them to answer 5 questions. Can you restate the purpose in 1 sentence? Can you name the primary constraint? Can you list the immediate dependency? Can you point to the exact branch or file representing the current state? Can you list the open questions?
And if the receiver cannot answer those questions just by looking at the payload, the handoff fails the test.
Exactly. But you touched on a critical danger, what the source calls bureaucratic compliance.
Right.
If an engineer opens a task and the constraint section just says none, or the purpose section vaguely says because the product manager requested it, the ticket has technically fulfilled the template structure. The boxes are checked, but practically the payload is completely empty.
The form was filled out, but no actual context was transferred.
This is where a fundamental culture shift has to occur within the team. The receiver must be culturally empowered and expected to push back on low-quality context.
They have to speak up.
They have to be able to say, this purpose statement is just an activity. I am rejecting this handoff. The expert framing from the source is vital here. This is not a quality gate, it's a cost gate.
It's a cost gate. That reframing changes the entire conversation. You aren't being a stickler for the rules or being difficult. You are acting as a steward of the company's resources. You are protecting the team's time and the company's budget from the tax of rework.
To solidify how this practically impacts a team's workflow and emotional state, the text provides a detailed before and after case study.
Oh, good.
It illustrates the cascading consequences of getting this wrong and the friction-reducing power of getting it right.
I want to walk through this narrative deeply because the before scenario is going to induce PTSD for a lot of our listeners.
Fair warning.
Okay, imagine a standard Tuesday. The design team decides they need to update the game's UI. The designer goes into Jira, creates a ticket, assigns it to engineering, and writes a single line of instruction. Add crafting material requirements to the failure message. They hit save. Handoff complete.
From the framework's perspective, this is a disaster. It is an activity without intent. There is no current state established. There are zero constraints listed.
So an engineer picks up the ticket. They look at it. It seems simple enough. They write a quick string of code that pulls the names of the missing materials and displays them in a text box on the screen when the player fails to craft an item. They mark it done and pass it to quality assurance.
Sounds smooth so far.
QA boots up the build, starts testing, and immediately flags a massive bug. When the game is set to German, the words for the crafting materials are incredibly long. The text overflows the box, breaks the UI formatting, and on the Nintendo Switch version, half the words are physically clipped off the edge of the screen.
The engineer built a logical solution, but because the payload lacked the technical constraint of Switch handheld readability and the process constraint of must support German localization, they built a solution that was inherently unshippable.
So QA kicks the ticket back to engineering. Meanwhile, a UI artist happens to see the ticket moving around the board. They jump into the Slack channel and ask, wait, are we using the high-res 3D icons for these crafting materials or the flat 2D icons we used in the old menu?
The dependencies and open questions were entirely unaddressed.
Finally, the lead designer sees a screenshot of what the engineer built. They immediately call a halt to everything. They say, no. The material requirements aren't supposed to just be static text. The player needs to be able to click on the missing material and be taken directly to the in-game store to buy it. It has to be an interactive flow.
Because the purpose was never stated, the engineer had no way of knowing the intent was to drive player monetization through an interactive flow.
Yeah.
They just executed the literal activity. Add requirements.
What is the result of this single one-sentence ticket? A producer has to throw their hands up in frustration, block out everyone's calendar, and schedule a massive 1-hour alignment meeting with design, engineering, art, and QA.
A total nightmare.
The feature is pushed back to the backlog. 3 days of work are completely wasted, and the psychological toll is immense. As the text astutely points out, everyone leaves that scenario feeling like everyone else is incompetent. The designer thinks the engineer is clueless. The engineer thinks the designer is vague. But it wasn't incompetence. It was simply a missing payload.
Now, let's reset the board and run the exact same feature request, adding crafting requirements. But this time, we apply the rigid 5-item package.
Okay, the designer takes 5 minutes to write a proper payload before assigning the ticket.
Let's hear it.
Purpose: reduce early game player confusion and drive store engagement by showing exactly what materials are missing at the moment of failure.
Very clear.
Current state. The current failure state is a generic pop-up. A visual prototype exists in the YV2 branch. This task covers the failure pop-up only.
Good boundaries.
Constraints. The UI must support extended German localization strings. It must fit within the existing pop-up dimensions. Text must be readable on a Switch handheld screen.
No surprises there.
Dependencies. Blocking. We need the interactive 2D icons from Art, ETA Friday. Non-blocking. Engineering can wire the interaction logic using placeholder boxes today.
Love that.
Open questions. Do we show exact numbers of missing materials or just the icon? Owner. Lead design. Decision by Wednesday stand-up. Default assumption. Show exact numbers.
The contrast is staggering. Look at how that information fundamentally alters the trajectory of the work.
It really does.
The engineer reads that ticket on Tuesday morning. They immediately see the localization and switch constraints. Because they know the constraints before they write a line of code, they don't bother building a static text box.
Right.
They instantly make the technical trade-off to build a scrolling interactive icon list that can accommodate any language. QA sees the ticket and knows exactly what edge cases to validate. Art sees a dependency and knows their Friday deadline is critical.
And crucially, that potential scope fight about exact numbers versus generic icons is contained. The designer has until Wednesday to decide. If they don't, the engineer just builds the default assumption. The feature still takes time to write, test, and integrate. We aren't magically doing the work faster, but the work stops bouncing. It stops ricocheting between departments, destroying schedules, and frustrating everyone involved.
If we expand this analysis to the broader landscape of modern work, this framework shifts from being helpful to being absolutely critical when we factor in hybrid and fully remote teams.
Oh, without a doubt. The days of everyone sitting in the same room are gone for so many companies.
The author makes a profound observation here. Hybrid work exponentially increases the financial and temporal cost of missing context.
How so?
Well, 10 years ago, if a handoff was broken and everyone shared a physical office floor, you could patch the holes with a 30-second hallway conversation. The engineer stands up, walks over to the designer's desk and says, "Hey, did you want static text or interactive buttons here?" The designer says, "Interactive buttons." Boom! The broken handoff is repaired in under a minute.
But in a distributed asynchronous team, the geography and the time zones turn that simple clarification into a massive delay. Imagine, I'm the designer working in New York and my lead engineer is based in Tokyo. I write a vague ticket and go to sleep. My engineer wakes up, starts working, hits a wall because it didn't specify the localization constraint, and sends me a Slack message at 3:00 p.m. Tokyo time.
Which is the middle of the night for you.
Exactly. I don't see the message until I wake up the next morning, by which time the engineer has logged off for the day.
You just lost an entire 24-hour development cycle over a single missing sentence.
It's insane.
The handoff package acts as a vital asynchronous bridge. It drastically reduces the number of times an engineer has to stop work and wait for the globe to spin just to reconstruct your intent.
But beyond just saving time and preventing Slack tag, there's a deeper layer to this framework that I found incredibly compelling for anyone in a management position.
Oh, the diagnostic tool aspect.
Yes. The author suggests that this 5-item package is not just a workflow tool. It is actually a diagnostic instrument for evaluating the health of your entire organization.
It acts as a mirror, making the organization's systemic dysfunctions visible. If a leadership team implements this template, they can simply observe where the framework consistently fails to gather intelligence about the company's operational bottlenecks.
Let's break that down. If a team starts using the template and they notice that despite filling out the constraints section, massive technical or legal constraints are still constantly surfacing late in the project and causing rework, what does that actually tell a manager?
It tells you that you do not have a documentation problem. You have a pipeline problem.
A pipeline problem.
The crucial information regarding performance limits or legal compliance is not flowing to the front lines before work begins. It means the people writing the tickets are isolated from the people setting the rules.
Wow.
What if, upon reviewing a month of tickets, a manager sees that the dependencies section is constantly filled with vague statements or lacks ETAs?
That indicates a severe planning and resourcing problem. It means no one is actually looking over the horizon to sequence the work across departments. Everyone is just operating in their own silo and hoping the pieces magically fit together at the end.
Exactly. And what if the package consistently reveals a massive list of open questions, but those questions rarely have an assigned owner or a default assumption?
Oh, that's the most damning one. That points to a fundamental decision-making crisis. It reveals a leadership vacuum where no one is willing to take responsibility for making a hard call, so the organization just wallows in ambiguity.
Precisely. By standardizing the format of the context payload, you don't just prevent individual instances of rework, you shine a massive spotlight on exactly where your organizational culture is breaking down.
That is such a powerful way to look at project management. It elevates it from administrative busy work to strategic diagnosis.
It really does.
Before we move to our final takeaways, I want to briefly highlight a specific resource the author recommends in the source text. It's called the Gamedev Production and Design Workbook. And look, even if you have nothing to do with video games, if you build enterprise software or run marketing campaigns or manage supply chains, the concept behind this workbook is fantastic.
I completely agree.
It is a physical notebook designed specifically to combat scattered context. The left-hand pages contain structured frameworks like the 5-item handoff package, and the right-hand pages are blank for your actual meeting notes and scribbles.
It forces you to organize.
It is designed to force your brain into structuring information at the exact moment you are absorbing it. So, if you are the type of person who benefits from tactile, physical tools to anchor your habits, it is highly recommended you track that down.
It's an excellent method for grounding abstract communication theory into a daily physical habit.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, what does this all mean for you? Whether you are coordinating a massive global software launch, designing a new logo with a freelance illustrator, or just organizing a complicated event with a committee, the underlying mechanics of human collaboration are universal.
They really are.
If you want to spend less time sitting in confusing meetings and more time actually doing the work you are good at, you have to actively bound the context. You have to take the implicit assumptions floating around in your head and make them explicit on the page.
And that leads to a final lingering thought that builds directly on the author's closing challenge.
I love this part.
At the end of the source document, the author poses a direct question to the reader. Take a look at your own team. Which part of the handoff package is most chronically missing? Is it constraints, dependencies, or open questions?
It's a great audit to perform on your own workflow today.
But I want to push that thought one step further. If you identify a chronic absence in your team's communication, you have to ask yourself, what psychological reality that absence reveals about your workplace culture? The blank spaces on your Jira boards are speaking volumes.
What do you mean by psychological reality?
Let's use open questions as the test case. Imagine you institute this 5-item template tomorrow, and after a month, you realize that the open questions section is always left completely blank.
Nobody ever writes down a question.
Nobody ever writes down a question. Yet features are still constantly bouncing back with confusion and rework. What does that tell you? It suggests your team might be suffering from a profound lack of psychological safety.
Oh, wow. Because people are terrified of admitting they don't know something. They feel like if they document an open question, it will be viewed by management as a sign of incompetence or weakness. They'd rather guess and fail later than admit uncertainty today.
Precisely. Or consider the constraints section. If constraints are chronically missing from the payload, does your team suffer from a culture of toxic positivity?
Toxic positivity.
Is there a dynamic where everyone is so afraid to mention the harsh realities of a shrinking budget, a tight deadline, or technical debt, that they just smile, pretend the constraints don't exist, and hope for a miracle?
That is a staggering realization. The missing fields aren't just laziness. They are a mirror reflecting the unstated fears and dysfunctions of the team.
Yes, exactly.
Take a hard look at the tickets your team is generating tomorrow. The empty space might be telling you exactly where your culture needs to heal.
It transcends process. It is about understanding the human dynamics of how we share responsibility.
That is an incredible amount of insight to chew on. So here is your practical homework coming out of this deep dive. Tomorrow morning, find just one upcoming task, just one piece of work that needs to cross a boundary between you and a colleague.
Just one.
Before you send it, take 5 minutes to write out the payload. Purpose, current state, constraints, dependencies, open questions. Keep it under 15 lines. Send it, and then just measure the result. Watch what happens.
See the difference.
Does the endless chain of clarifying Slack messages suddenly vanish? Do you get your afternoon back because you didn't have to schedule a quick call?
If we return to the X-ray machine metaphor from the very beginning of our conversation.
Yes, the difference between finding a software bug and diagnosing a communication breakdown.
You cannot put a fractured human communication process into a diagnostic machine. There is no automated stack trace for misunderstanding. But by implementing a rigorous standardized payload for your handoffs, you are essentially injecting contrast dye into the bloodstream of your organization's workflow.
I love that. Contrast dye.
You illuminate the hidden bottlenecks, you establish clear boundaries around ownership, and you cure the viral infection of rework before it has a chance to spread.
You stop paying interest on the tax of poor communication, and you finally get to keep your time. Try the 5-item package. Build the habit. Stop the bounce. Until next time, keep diving deep.
If this is useful, subscribe.
New breakdowns every week.